Hi, so my name is Kelsey and I am over as Essentially Booked, and this is my very first booktube video. I am going to do a mid-year book freakout video and just go through the first half of the year. I've read almost 67 books. I'm under 70 still, and my year-end goal is 120, so I'm well on my way, averaging about 10 to 12 books a month. But I've had a really meh reading year so far. I've read some really great books and then I've read some not so great books. I'm excited to see what I read in the back half of the year. I'm really trying to focus on my unread shelf, and I own a lot of books, so I'm hoping I have a more fun reading year in the back half. The very first prompt of the mid-year book freakout is the best book you've read so far this year, and that is, hands down, this was very easy, Hannah Coulter by Wendell Berry. I really, really love quiet books. And I like books that are really introspective, and maybe not a lot goes on in them, but you just really sit down and pause and think. And Hannah Coulter is about Hannah Coulter. Wendell Berry has written a whole series of books about the Port William cast of characters in this town in Kentucky. And they're very simple people. It's a very small town, lots of agriculture, and just Wendell Berry's writing is so beautiful. So Hannah Coulter is just writing on her life and reflecting back. And it's not a super long book, but it is just so gorgeously written. It took me a long time to read because I just wanted to savor the book and just Hannah's voice, her life. She is a very simple woman, but just her experiences. And then I actually joined a book club and they picked Jayber Crow, which is another book in the Port William. So I'm reading that right now, and it's also probably going to be a favorite. Wendell Berry is just spectacular if you like well-written literature, and he's definitely like a modern American classics writer. I like how he there's detail as far as like the environment, and he's a very strong agriculturalist, but like with an environmental lens. The next prompt is the best sequel you've read thus far this year. And that is, without a doubt, All the Devils Are Here by Louise Penny. I love the Three Pines series. Again, her mysteries are good, but it's the writing, it's the cast of characters between Inspector Gamache and the Three Pines people. It's just so great. Louise Penny is fantastic at writing almost like stories within stories. So like in between her novels, sometimes a whole bunch of stuff can happen and it's not even in the book, but yet you're not missing out on anything. And I think that's really brilliant. I also just like how she writes her characters to the point where they feel like they're your own family. And this one is just, this takes place in Paris, so it's not even in Three Pines. The mystery is just really fast, it's propulsive, and more the character dynamics in this one. We learn about Inspector Gamache's family, and the father-son dynamic in this book is heart-wrenching. I loved it so much. I could not put it down. I read it on vacation in Hawaii, and it was just a perfect read for me at the time. And then the next prompt is the new release you haven't read but are excited about. And that would be For the Throne by Hannah Witten. I kind of read the first one by surprise. I just thought the cover looks cool, put it on hold at the library, checked and like read it in a day and a half. And the first one is called For the Wolf, and it is essentially a dark Little Red Riding Hood retelling. It kind of gave me like Snow White vibes, just the creepy forest, kind of where the forest turns like dark in the Disney movie. A great reimagining. Like the trees are out to get the people and like snatch you, and it's wonderful. So the second book is going to be about the main character's sister from the first book, and I'm pretty sure once I start it, I'm not gonna put it down. So I'm so excited for this one. Next prompt is the biggest disappointment. I made a goal to read 4 books this year, and I'll talk about the remaining 3 later on in this video. But one of them was The Secret History. So they were just 4 books I wanted to read by the end of the year that had been sitting on my shelf that were like big honkers, and I wanted to read one a quarter. Haven't done that. But I was reading, was it 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson? And they referenced this book, and I figured I should probably read it. It was assigned, so I picked it up. And that book is The Secret History. by Donna Tartt. I will say this book was great, but not for me. And I understand why it's considered a modern classic. I loved her writing, but I also hated it. Like, her writing's really good and I can acknowledge that. It was just so unnecessarily wordy. If you know what 8 Perfect Murders is about, it's about a serial killer that's emulating like famous murders from books. So that's why I picked this up, is I wanted to understand this murder. I didn't need to read this whole honkin' book to understand the murder. And I thought, you know, a lot of the characters were great. There's so many words in this book that really I was like, you're just writing to write at this point and not to move the story along. I do tend to like dark academia books, which The Secret History is very dark academia. None of the characters are good. And I also really love books with unlikable characters. I just did not like this one. So it was definitely my biggest disappointment because of the time and energy I put into it. Again, I get why it's a classic. It just was not for me at all. And then the biggest surprises of the year. So I'm kind of one of those people that if a book is overhyped and super hyped, I'm probably not going to read it for a while. And sometimes that bites me in the butt, sometimes it doesn't. I had 2 books this year that fall into that category of being so overhyped that I was like, I'm not going to read them. There's kind of a sweet spot for me where like when a book is hyped, if I pick it up within the first few months, I'm not a jerk about it. But if it's after that, that's when I'm like, no, I'm not going to read it. These 2 I read later than What's My Sweet Spot, so I was a little skeptical. The first one is Leave the World Behind by Ruben Alam. Oh my goodness, I loved it. It's not that long. The writing is very ambiguous. You have no idea really what's happening. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic book, kind of. It's more trying to figure out like what is happening to these people. And it's a couple that rents an Airbnb with their family. Something happens in the world, you don't know what it is. And then the owners of the Airbnb come to stay because this house is like kind of remote. It's their home, yada, yada. The ending is totally ambiguous. So if you hate those, you're not gonna like this, but I loved it. There was a lot of unnecessary writing about like body functions, but the book was just so good I didn't care. Normally that's like a huge turnoff for me. I love this. I wish I could experience it for the first time again. Definitely recommend it if you like ambiguous things, if you like kind of end of the world-ish vibes. One thing that I will say is had I picked this up in like March of 2020, which I think it came out in 2020, I would have probably been too scared to keep reading, what with the pandemic and all of that. So that's something to be aware of if you're sensitive to that. This isn't a pandemic book, but you don't know what's happening. And it's just so brilliant. The other biggest surprise for me was The Paper Palace. My mom and I read kind of similarly, so if she raves about a book, I know I'm gonna read it. And I have a great friend, Ashley, who also has a pretty similar reading style to me, and she raved about it. So The Paper Palace, it's basically about a woman who has an affair, and she's terrible. The whole cast of characters in that book are terrible, which I love unlikable characters for the most part. There's a ton of trigger warnings, so make sure you look into those before you start the book. I read it in a day, could not put it down. And then once I finished it, I wasn't sure the actual like choice the woman made. So then I went back and just read the book. I read the book from the day that the event took place. So it kind of goes between today and the past. And so I just read all the parts about today, and then her choice became very clear. And it made me love the book all the more. My favorite new author of this year is definitely Lisa K. Adams from the Bromance Book Club series. I'm on the 3rd book. What a treat, what a delight the series is. More men should read romance novels, so I totally love that premise. I'm a huge romance reader, and I love that these men are trying to fix their lives by reading romance novels, and I laugh out loud. All of them so far have been great, and I can't wait to keep reading. I can't wait for the Russian book, but all in all, I just adored that series, and I'm so glad that I picked it up. Okay, so the next one is your favorite character, cast of characters, characters you love. And I will say the Port William cast. I talked about Hannah Coulter earlier by Wendell Berry, but I am quickly just having a soft spot in my heart for all of Port William, and I can't wait to read the books in that series. It'll probably be like a 5 to 10 year undertaking because these are not like super easy books to read. They're very contemplative, they're very contemplative and quiet and introspective. So like Jaber Crow's a lot larger of a book. It will take me a while, but I just love to savor that writing. So we'll slowly get to know more of Port William, and I can't wait to explore that community more. The next prompt is the book that made you cry. So I have two of these. The first is No Land to Light On by Yara Zahib, and this was an indie press list selection from the Currently Reading Bookish Friends group. But it is about a couple who gets separated when the Muslim ban goes into effect in 2018 or 2019, I can't remember. And they get separated at the airport, and the ramifications for both of them, like what happens. It's just a heartbreaking novel. It's beautifully written, and it really makes you first consider how lucky you are to not have to go through that, but it also just made me extremely empathetic and humanized a story that I remember watching on the news and protesting, and I don't live really in an international airport area, so like it really didn't come to our community. We really didn't have to experience what were felt in other communities. Just such a great book. The other book that made me cry was All My Rage by Saba Tahir. This has been getting a lot of like praise all over the place. So it's really about two friends and their families and just these poor children, these teenagers. They can't catch a break. They have to make some like unbelievably hard decisions to kind of survive and get ahead. It was really realistic, and I really, really liked it. This is the first book I've ever read by this author. I know she has other stuff, and I think it's more fantasy, I believe. So I will probably explore her more, but holy cow, this book. It's not light, like, so also look for trigger warnings on this one, but it's so well written, and I listened to it on audio and it was fantastic. Just as all the pieces come together, your heart just continues to break. It is a wonderful book, and it probably will be in my top 10 of the year. It was like so fantastic. A book that made you happy, of course, it's The House of Sky and Breath. I love Sarah J. Maas and got on the bandwagon way too late, but this was just what I needed at the time. I had a friend who read it about the same time as me, and we were both like messaging the whole time. It's my friend MARTI, I'll link her in the comment. But we had a blast talking about it, and then we're trying to get all of our friends to read it so that we could also freak out about it, and it was just such a fun experience. I love reading new releases like that, and when you can kind of gush about it with a friend, it's just so much fun. So next prompt is the most beautiful book you've received or bought this year. And I really don't feel like I like The Stationery Shop a few years ago, most beautiful book ever. I don't really have any of that caliber, but I will say this is probably the prettiest. I will say this is the prettiest book that I have added to my collection this year, and it is The Tobacco Wives by Adele Myers. I don't know a lot about this. I heard about it on a podcast. Then I was on Indie Bookstore Day as we were hopping shops. I just bought this because the cover was pretty. So I can't wait to read this, whatever it's about. Pretty cover, that works. So previously I had said I wanted to read 4 Big Clunkers this year, and they were books that had been sitting on my TBR for a really long time, and I just wanted to get to. So one of them I finished. It was The Secret History. You know my thoughts. Here are the other 3. So the first is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. I've started this and then I just put it down a long time ago, and I'm ready to pick it up again and read it. I know I'll love it. I just need to sit down and read it. So that's the first one I want to get done. And then Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. I've started it. I'm trying to kind of do like a chapter a day. I bought it when George Floyd died and did not get to it like I thought I would. So that's this is the one that I like absolutely want to read. I think it's just a really curious premise, intellectual and based on like the thought of racist thinking. And I just think that's really intriguing. The third book of my clunkers is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. I know I haven't read this yet. I'm sorry. It's on my list and I'm finally gonna get to it this year. I think I'll really like it. It has like queer representation. I know the Catholic Church is in it. At some point I will do a video on like deconstruction and books that I've read. I've just heard really wonderful things about this. So those are my 3 clunkers. And then I have a few books that I just know I need to read that I haven't read, and I'm tired of them sitting on my shelf. So I've read everything by Emily Henry but Beach Read. So Beach Read will get read by the end of this year. And then the other book that I really want to get to, I have a few book club books that I haven't read from the Modern Mrs. Darcy book club. So that's my ultimate goal, is to get those caught up. But The Lovely War, I love Greek mythology and retellings, and so I know I'll adore this, just haven't gotten to it. So The Lovely War would be probably the other book I absolutely must read by the end of this year. But yeah, that's my 2022 mid-year book Freakout.